I am sick. I'm deeply disturbed and my morals are questionable. I'm a horrible, horrible person and I'm perverted to the core. Why? Because I like to look at car crashes. Slovene philosopher Slavoj Žižek categorized traffic accidents as objective violence in his 2008 book Violence: Six Sideways Reflections. He defined objective violence as the systemic violence we encounter every day, a kind of violence so normalized we don't even consider it to be violence. Žižek argues we zoom in on what he deems subjective violence, which is the kind of violence we can pinpoint easily to an individual or a group of individuals. It encompasses bar fights, rape, murder, smashing a bloke in the back of the head with a beer bottle because he keeps saying cheers instead of thanks. Objective violence, through its normalization, becomes the backdrop where the other type of violence occurs. It's the dark matter of it all, that which exists, which influences, but cannot be seen. It's the capitalist systemic violence happening every single day. It may entail traffic accidents, environmental damages, oppression of people, for example sweatshop workers, etc. Where the subjective violence is seen as disturbing the normal, the peaceful, the quiet, the objective violence is seen as the violence inherent to this normal state of things. Systemic violence is the violence of capitalism. It keeps the system afloat, and following that, it's the violence we accept as society. So basically, people dying in traffic is violence we accept. The fact is that going 50 kilometers per hour would be inefficient, so we accept the deaths a faster speed will incur. After all, we could produce cars that only reach 50 kilometers per hour, but literally we could go an entire year without any incidents of subjective violence at all, and people would be like, oh, we are so peaceful, look at us, we are so great. No, 100,000 people died on the highways this year. Yeah, but I got my copy of Saul Kripke's Naming a Necessity a day earlier than they estimated. Bruh. So, why is it cool to have thousands of deaths, but it ain't cool for me to stop and stare? Why do I disturb the peace with my gaze? Why is it considered so damn quaint to do so? And on the other hand, and this is the topic of this video, why am I compelled to look at it? What is it about car crashes that stops me in my tracks? Two Frenchmen may help us out in this: existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre and psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan. But before we get there, we have to look at the crash. What is a crash, and what happens during a crash? Now, if we go by Zizek again, the car crash is an event. That is, it's an effect that exceeds its cause. If we take that to be true, it means the crash itself and the cleanup and the rescuing is actually part of the same event. There's a quaint temporal asymmetry between the two. The cleanup always takes way longer than the crash. In an intersection near me, it follows a formula. Usually a car runs a red light and another one smashes into it. After that, concerned pedestrians either perform CPR or call the emergency services. Police and ambulances arrive and they try to establish some kind of order and to save the people involved in the crash. Now stick with me, this is where it gets interesting. Even though literally everyone else in the area are looking at the two car wrecks in some capacity, I just can't bring myself to do so directly. I purposefully try to position myself worse. I try to obfuscate my view. I cross the street, I sit down at the bus stop nearby to sort of blend in with the sea of onlookers in front of me. My eyes look at the abrasive siren lights instead of the car wrecks. I don't really look at the car wrecks, I just leer at them from like the corner of my eye. I do all of these things to actually avoid looking at the wrecks, even though looking at them is what I desire. So what is it with me? Why do I long to look, but to do so in a not really kind of way? Well, according to Jean-Paul Sartre, I am ashamed. In Being and Nothingness, in a chapter called The Look, Sartre describes how subjects fight for power among each other. He considers the look a force. Usually, we are the ones in charge. The world is situated around us, effectively being created by us. We are the subject establishing a world of objects. We are the poursoir ruling over the ensoir. However, this disrupts whenever another subject emerges in our field of vision. The other initiates an ontological and phenomenological tug of war, one with a clear winner and a clear loser. The subject and the other fight over who gets to establish the world. Sartre's version of the look is one doused in negativity. The other is viewed as an outsider, one who intrudes. The defining feature of the Sartrean look is not the presence of someone else. It's the nagging feeling of a presence of the other. Sartre writes how the look may emerge in rustling trees, moving curtains, footsteps walking. The confrontation with the other causes a violent feeling of shame. Sartrean shame is not shame how we usually conceive it. It's not an emotion, it's not a feeling, it's not an affect. Shame is an existential mood to Sartre. It's a fundamental restructuring of any perception of self we have. The look of the other strips us of our freedom, of our status as subject, and transforms us into an object. The process alienates us as subjects. It forces us to take on a new identity we didn't choose ourselves. The world slips away from us and it flows into the other. As philosophers Barrois and Sharma put it, shame introduces a new dimension to your existence as it challenges your subjective position at the center of your universe and throws you out of yourself. When I stand outside at the intersection on the pavement, tucked away behind people, it's to avoid exactly the existential shame. I try to remain in control. I try to stay a centered subject. I try to maintain my stability. It's tough because the Sartrean look is everywhere at the scene, and it's strong and it's overpowering. People look not only at the wrecks, but they look at the people around them too, also to maintain a sense of subjectivity. There are the harsh blue sirens lighting up the entire street, scanning each iota of space, objectifying us all in the process. The fact that I want to cover myself up makes sense. It is so easy to lose oneself in the process. Another interpretation of this look comes from Jacques Lacan. In order to distinguish clearly between Sartre and him, I shall refer to the look as the gaze from now on. The Lacanian gaze is multiplicitous and has been interpreted in many different ways over the decades. It changes depending on clinical structures and on context. Here, in this video, I will only focus on the neurotic because that's the most common one of the clinical structures of the fundamental pathologies. The neurotic is the clinical structure which always responds to the other's question, que voy? They're always asking themselves, what does the other want? How do I appear to the other? What am I like in the view of the other? The neurotic subject is concerned with the gaze of the big other. It's a reaction of anxiety, and the neurotic desperately tries to shield himself from it. But okay. What is the gaze when I'm standing there and leering at the car wrecks? In Seminar 11, Lacan tells a story about when he worked on a fishing boat. One of the fishermen, Lacan calls him Petit, points to a tin can floating in the ocean. Petit asks him whether he can see the tin can, and when Lacan says yes, he's able to see the tin can, Petit tells him that the tin can does not see Lacan. Lacan, however, claims that it does exactly that. It does see Lacan. The tin can functions as a fraction of the speculum mundi, the all-reflecting mirror of the world. This is a metaphor, but take it as a metaphor saying there's a dialectic between seeing and being seen. It's a game with many contestants, some subjects, some objects. The gaze, like Sartre's look, is separated from the eyes as an organ. It doesn't need actual eyes to work. It's situated everywhere. Now, following this, the Petit story also highlights the gaze as an unconscious vision, which sees something else than the eye does. A subject's vision always has to go through the eyes, but the scopic field is larger than so. The gaze is sort of tucked away everywhere. There will always be blind spots where the eyes cannot reach, almost by virtue of the world being three-dimensional. Lacan says the gaze photographs the subject. The gaze inserts the subject into a context, a temporal and spatial context, where it is unable to master itself. It becomes a point, a mechanical element. It's vision's two-sidedness which makes the subject uncomfortable. On the one hand, the eye is a concrete organ which sees the imaginary phantasm the subject erects, the screen, as Lacan calls it. On the other hand, vision is the gaze, it's the gap of the unconscious. And in order to guard itself from the gaze, the neurotic erects a screen. In one interpretation of the gaze, the screen can be objects of fascination. It can be images, paintings, movies, spectacles, etc. These function as ways for the neurotic subject to sidestep the gaze, but giving it something to ponder, something to immerse itself in. Lacan gives the example of a painter and a painting. The painter gives something to the person who must stand in front of his painting, which, in part at least, of the painting might be summed up thus: you wanna see? Well, take a look at this. He gives something for the eye to feed on, but he invites the person to whom this picture is presented to lay down his gaze there, as one lays down one's weapons. As Lacan would put it, I am elided as a subject in front of the picture. This goes for the spectacle of the car wrecks too, by the way. As I look at the car wrecks, I am photographed, I am fixed, I am captivated. I melt together with the sight. I'm unable to disentangle myself from it. I'm no longer distinct from the sight of the car wrecks. We are merged with each other. In another interpretation of the gaze, the screen is the phantasms of the imaginary. This is where the gaze functions as tüke. It becomes an encounter with the real. The gaze emerges as something which tears down our phantasms, which tears down the screen of the neurotic, something uncomfortable and disturbing. As I look at the car wrecks, I am subjected to the gaze. In order to shield myself, I put forth these phantasms, exemplified directly by me avoiding looking at the wrecks. Doing so confirms me in my fantasy. I am a decent person. It is morally wrong to look at the wrecks. I'm disturbed for doing so, etc. I place a blot on the wrecks, and to the symbolic register, I place a blot on myself. Lacan calls this blot la tâche. I avoid the gaze, I avoid the wrecks, which are staring straight at me. In doing so, I put myself in check. I am acting in accordance with the phantasms I have about myself. The other people around me, the police officers too, the rescuers, they act as the little other. I mirror my phantasms in their presence. The psychic encounter with the real is uncomfortable. It tears apart my phantasm. It blows apart my screen. It could be an example of a compulsive repetition, a painful experience or emotion I keep repeating. And as such, it's a direct link to the death drive. It is here the gaze functions as the scopic feels objet petit, the object cause of desire. It's odd to think of the gaze, an immaterial thing, as an object, but that's because of the neurotic screen. Lacan defines the objet petit thusly. The objet is something from which the subject, in order to constitute itself, has separated itself off as organ. Lacan goes on to saying that the scopic objet petit is intrinsically linked to the desire of the other. The gaze as objet petit is something that emerges whenever the subject clashes with the other, with that which cannot be seen. There's something in those car wrecks I desire in order to feel completed. Maybe it's the desire to be in a car crash myself. Maybe it's the desire to actually see a collision unfold before my eyes. Maybe it's a desire to see suffering, to see pain. Maybe it's the desire to feel the same kind of attention that's concentrated at the crash site. Whatever the case may be, I can never have it. It can never fulfill the lack within me, a lack situated in all of us as barred subjects. Desire is always deferred, it's metonymic. What I look at is never what I wish to see, as Lacan puts it. A big thanks to my Patreons. I absolutely adore you guys for helping me out. Thank you so much for your support. And apart from that, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye, Felicia.